let's go ahead and move on to some interesting new numbers from Gallup, which ties into how Americans are feeling about, I mean, this ties into the whole show, right? How Americans are feeling about a totally dysfunctional political system and about the inability to deliver for regular people. Put this up on the screen. You now have support for third parties up to 63%. 63% of U.S. adults currently agree with the statement that the Republican and Democratic parties do such a poor job of representing the American people that a third major party is needed. That represents a 7 percentage point increase from just a year ago, and it is the highest since Gallup first asked the question back in 2003. And Saagar, part of what was really interesting and surprising to me was that the largest numbers of support for a third party are with independents. That part makes sense. But you now have a majority of Republicans, 58%, who endorse a third U.S. political party. That's up significantly. It was just 45% a year ago. The only other time more Republicans than now expressed support for a third party was in a late January, early February 2021 poll conducted after the January 6th riots, the second impeachment of Donald Trump, and the presidential inauguration of Joe Biden. There has also been an uptick in support for third party among Democrats this year from 40 to 46%, though still less than majority back the idea. So a lot of the movement in this poll towards support for a third party is actually on the Republican side of the ledger.
I think that's fantastic. The more that the individual parties become less legitimate in the eyes of the public, I think that's fantastic. In terms of the Republican side, we can explain it a couple of different ways. A lot of it is that Trump's dissatisfaction. The majority of Republicans do support Trump, of course, but many people who are Republicans don't. And that's actually very evidenced in the data. The last time that third-party support was this high in the Gallup tracker was January of 2021. Anyone want to remember what happened around then? It was January 6th.
Right.
So a lot of people were upset with the direction of the party, and a lot of Republican voters in particular. Here's the other thing and why you can reconcile this. You could be a Trump Republican and not actually be a Republican at all. You're more just you're a Trumplican, I guess, or something like that. You just support Trump. You don't support the overall party apparatus. You don't believe in the RNC. You don't care about like the Reagan rule about insulting. You're like, no, I love Trump. Trump is my politics, not the Republican Party, not Vivek Ramaswamy or Mike Pence or any of these other people. I got nothing in common with those people. So of course they would be actually supportive of a third party, because if Trump were to run as a third party, I think he would win a lot of those voters. So the more that Trump turned the Republican Party into a cult of personality, by an extension, he actually dramatically reduced the overall credibility of said party. Now, I'm fascinated by the Democratic number, because 46% for a bunch of people who are hardcore institutionalists and love the media and all that stuff, that's very high. I don't know where that comes from. I think it could be Biden age. It could be, I mean, there's a lot of things. I wonder what you think. How it can be a near majority in the
I have to think that the numbers would be very clearly skewed by age demographic.
Yeah,
so I think, the younger part of the Democratic coalition is extremely dissatisfied with this party, feels like their priorities and their like ideological inclinations are completely sneered at. They feel dismissed by this party. They feel like this party does not care about what they want, is not responsive to them, takes them completely for granted, and they just don't have that same level of just, Democratic Party loyalty that perhaps previous generations did and still do. So that's my guess, is young voters. And that's where we see the largest amount of dissatisfaction within the Democratic coalition with Joe Biden himself. So that's my expectation of what is going on there. And I mean, the overall numbers just reflect the fact that people are unhappy. They feel like the country is in decline and decay. They feel like there's a rot at the core. They feel like, they have no hope for the future. They feel like they're never going to be able to buy a house. They feel like they're not going to be able to send their kids to college. They feel like they're never going to be able to pay off their college student loan debt. They feel like neither of these parties is really delivering for them on these, material realities that are making their lives very stressful, very difficult. For young people, also, the climate crisis looms really large, and they see a little bit of action, but then they see like 2 steps backward with a bunch of new oil leases, et cetera, from the Biden administration. So that level of dissatisfaction, as reflected in third-party support, makes a lot of sense to me. Now, I think it's always important with these third-party polls to put in a note of caution, which is that our electoral system, the way it's set up, is set up to crush third parties and make them not viable. So the mere fact that you have a large number of people who are like, yeah, there should be some other choices, doesn't mean those people are going to vote for the other choices.
Yes.
And you know, the fact that you have this large group saying, yeah, we want other choices, they also don't mean the same things by that in terms of what they would want to see with those other choices. So we've had high numbers like this before, and it hasn't translated into a large third-party vote, even when you've had some choices on the ballot that are third-party candidates.
Absolutely. There was also a fascinating RFK Jr. kind of tie into this. If he does end up running as an independent, which we expect him to do, let's put this up there on the screen. Nate Silver ran the numbers over at the Free Press, which is run by Barry Weiss, and he argues, again, pretty persuasively what we said about how he probably doesn't hurt Biden, and in most respects will almost certainly will almost certainly hurt Trump. Now, I also understand that it is annoying to people who support third-party candidates and all about hurt, the idea that they should be viewed on their face. I don't even necessarily disagree with you. But again, Krystal, you and I are trapped in what? The reality of the American political system.
Yeah.
Which is, you know, it's a duopoly. I don't wish it wasn't necessarily that way. But, you know, when we're talking about places where you can only get anywhere between 1% to 5% of the ballot historically, you know, generally you're going to be a quote-unquote spoiler. I don't think of it that way, but that's how most people process it. What he writes in here is basically that because of the overall amount of favorability that RFK Jr. does have with a lot of Republican voters and or independents who are sick of the Democratic Party for reasons that don't necessarily align with the mainstream Democratic Party, then those people would predominantly gravitate towards either Trump or Trump-ish like candidate on those issue sets, things like Ukraine, the vaccine, and more. So with those and those voters who may not identify as Republicans, but who predominantly have sympathies with some parts of Republican voters who may disagree on several other issues, but that's not the priority. That's not what's drawing them away from the party. Largely, it is going to hurt in a duopoly system. So I think that when you look at that and you also see the Republican figure be so high, to be such an attitude and an appetite, if you will, for like something different, RFK Jr., especially with the Kennedy last name, with the specific issue set that he is most passionate about, I would view that very much as an avenue for him to be able to gain a lot of Republican votes. I'm not arguing he shouldn't run, by the way, but see, actually, funnily enough, I've started to see big MAGA Twitter accounts shift their focus. I actually saw this guy, DC Drano, if anybody knows, there's over 1 million followers on Twitter. And he was like, hey, I'm guilty of this. He's like, I propped up. He was actually very open. He was like, I elevated RFK Jr. because he was a cudgel against Democrats. He's like, now I'm going to start highlighting all the bad things about him because I think he's going to hurt Trump. And I was like, wow, that's a very...
so naked.
By the way, I love that. I love
here's
honesty.
How I was doing my propaganda before,
he's
and
like,
here's how I'll do my propaganda in the future.
Because I hate the Democrats and I want them to lose. Now, there he goes independent. I actually think he's going to hurt us. So now I'm going to start attacking him. And I was like, okay, I thank you.
Wow.
for telling us. I hope all people are that straight. Anyway, my point is that there is broad recognition amongst, as I said, every MAGA influencer of any consequence that I've been able to see. People who have legit massive followings amongst the overall GOP base. And I think the fact that they overwhelmingly believe that RFK Jr. would hurt Trump if it came down to it does tell you a lot about what they see the problem is. You know, and Trump himself has remained silent. This amount of data on third parties is also just another indication in that direction.
You know who I could see voting for RFK is people who are frustrated with Trump because they think he was like too pro-vax.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
Anthony Fauci and whatever.
Yeah, like a Ron DeSantis super stan or something.
Right, that's like kind of the, you know, just Trump is going to be the nominee. And so that seems to me like the most clear-cut avenue of people who are like, that's their issue, and they're like diehard about it and really super anti-vaccine, and there is a constituency for that. And most of those people, if it wasn't for RFK being there, would probably either not vote or they would vote for Donald Trump. They certainly wouldn't vote for Joe Biden. That seems to me like probably where he gets the bulk of his support from. But, you know, I do think it's complicated. Nate, on the one hand, as you're pointing out, he says guns, abortion, vaccines, and Ukraine are quite a quartet of issues to defect from the Democratic Party on, particularly from the suburban college-educated base that they rely on increasingly. Yeah. But he does make the other side, like, he's not really definitive about it. He's like, I could see it going either way. I think probably he takes more from Trump than Biden. But he says the most persuasive argument to him is that Trump has a higher floor but lower ceiling on his support than Biden does. In other words, the Trump support is much more locked in. His supporters are much more committed. So in that case, Trump's diehards might stick with him, even if they also like Kennedy. But people who are kind of like, on Biden may flirt with or consider the Kennedy candidacy. The other thing that I threw in the mix that Nate doesn't mention here that I do think is a really important factor is, remember, a lot of people don't pay that close attention. Yes. They aren't aware of RFK, all of RFK's positions and exactly where they are vis-a-vis him, et cetera. He's got a Kennedy last name. And there is a lot of just like historical affection for that name in the Democratic Party. I think it's a big part of why he has the support he has in a Democratic primary, in spite of the fact that he still has these, very low approval ratings within the Democratic Party. So it continues to not be totally clear-cut to me. I do think, and put this up on the screen, apparently there's a Kennedy campaign insider who told Mediaite that that RFK running independent is going to F Trump. So he was pretty clear about it. It's also kind of revealing the way this Kennedy campaign insider talked about RFK and about his assessment here. He says, this is going to F Trump. Bobby's values are much more in line with patriots, meaning, I guess, Republicans. He's against big pharma. He's pro-Bitcoin, decentralized so the government can't control it. So anyway, for what it's worth, RFK and his campaign seem to think this is going to be more of a problem for Trump. Very likely, it doesn't actually make that much of a difference either way.
It's possible.
Because especially if you have votes kind of split, some of the people might have gone to Biden, some of the people might have gone to Trump. Who knows? And historically, Americans just don't vote in that large of numbers for third-party candidates, especially if you're not going to have a bunch of MAGA influencers who are going after him, who aren't giving him the platform and the cover and the adulation that they were giving him when he was running against Biden. That could also change his favorability rating and the appetite for him within more Republican-aligned independents. So I don't know. We'll see. Hey guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.